As times change, so do our stories. We go from tales told around a communal fire to penny dreadfuls and pulps at the corner store, films projected onto a silver screen to interactive experiences that we have some degree of control within. But to hear those fire-lit tales, to read those pulp stories, may not have the same impact now as they did then. The most enthralling storytelling methods have changed. Our definition of heroism has changed. The things we are most scared of have changed. The fear that would grip us as a certain silhouette would darken a doorway, the distress as a mastermind's plan came to fruition, or even the visceral reaction at the mention of a certain name, all dull with time. So, stories and storytellers adapt. They change. We're not afraid of apex predators until presented with a situation in which we become prey again. Nazis can fluctuate from fearsome opposition to comic foil back to terror-inducing monsters, depending on what we need from them in the story in that era, and perhaps depending on their cultural pervasiveness at that time. As times change, so do our stories, our heroes, and the antagonists opposing them. All stories need conflict, after all. While it's interesting to look at general cultural shifts in antagonism from era to era, it will help more to narrow that focus to one particular antagonist. Resident Evil 4's Osmond Saddler and Resident Evil 4's Osmond Saddler. Allow me to help you awaken into these new worlds of cliches.
This is no ritual. It's terrorism.
Isn't that a popular word these days?
To understand our antagonist, let's look at our protagonist. Leon Scott Kennedy, a survivor of the Raccoon City zombie infestation 6 years prior, now a member of the United States Secret Service, was exactly the man his country needed to fight against this threat from overseas. Leon is a one-man army let loose from all red tape of bureaucracy, armed to the teeth with as many firearms as he can Tetris into his attaché case, brimming with timeless quips, and emotionally detached. He is unaffected by what he has seen and had to do in years past. He is a weapon, molded by his government and loosed upon its enemies. Now, the antagonist. Osmond Saddler, the leader of the Los Illuminados cult in rural Spain, is introduced to players as he oversees the capture and parasitization of our unconscious hero, Leon. Saddler is shadowy, nameless for the moment, and foreboding. He's introduced to us as a boogeyman, the one who seems to be pulling the strings around this doomed village we just fought through. A few chapters later, we run into Saddler properly. He stands alone, taking full ownership of this fine religious community that captured the president's daughter and has been trying to chainsaw Leon for the past several chapters. Sadler seeks to expand his influence and bemoans American foreign policy of the time in the same breath.
What do you want?
To demonstrate to the whole world our astounding power, of course. No longer will the United States think they can police the world forever.
His plan is simple. Using the president's parasite-infected daughter as a wedge, infect the highest echelons of the American government with the same mind-controlling parasite for a takeover of every level of leadership. Sadler is a foreign power who seeks to force their way onto all of us by any means. And just as soon as we meet him, as we know the grand scheme, as we have a face and a name to this nightmare, Sadler fades out again, not to reappear until much later. This first introduction to Sadler stands parallel to the confusion that surrounded the September 11th terrorist attacks. We stumble about in the aftermath trying to make sense of things and are given a face to associate with everything that just happened. We have a figurehead to blame everything on, even as that figurehead slinks in and out of the shadows. We are scared of everything that this figurehead perpetuates, all of his lieutenants and foot soldiers, but when we put a face to the actions, his is the one that comes to mind. To his followers, he is deified. To his enemies, demonized. A monster you're constantly on the watch for, that you start to see in the corner of your eye, whose influence has seeped into every crack of society. It's easier in Resident Evil 4 when everyone, short of 2 hands worth of characters, is a gibbering parasite host, but we saw it a lot in America following September 11th. Paranoia and distrust didn't have time to wait for legal proceedings. If you looked like the bad guy, you might as well be the bad guy. The boogeyman was everywhere, and the human reaction to fear is fight or flight. For the rest of the game, Sadler operates as a worst-case version of the terrorist boogeyman. Not only does he lurk and pull the strings of the entire cell in the background, but he gets directly involved when he wants to be certain of results. He personally attacks and kills Leon's allies, like Luis, in order to regain an important sample of the parasite, and Mike, the helicopter pilot, because a combat helicopter is too much for Leon to have in his corner. He gloats at, taunts, and antagonizes Leon through videophone the further through the game's final region Leon marches. He demonstrates his power, exerts control over the heroes, and is everything worth fearing in a terrorist boogeyman. That he's always just around the corner, that he's going to target us, our friends, that he is capable of doing all of the harm that he has threatened. But just as much, he embodies our greatest hopes of those villains. That in time, his organization will have been mulched through, that he will be the last one standing in our way, that he will have to fight the hero. When he is the last pillar of his terrorist organization, he must stand his ground. But if we topple that last pillar, if it falls, then that's it. Mission accomplished. It's hardly accurate, but that's the point and the power of certain stories. An escape from reality, an easy fix for a hard problem. Cut off the head, the monster dies, and terrorism with it, with just enough time to ride off triumphant into the sunset. Sadler was not a carbon copy of a mountain-hiding ringleader, nor a stock Middle Eastern terrorist seen in the antagonist slot so often at that time, and I believe that's why he was so effective. By subverting that one surface-level element, Sadler was able to accentuate the things that we were truly afraid of during the War on Terror, the dissolution of our known way of life by force. The storytelling landscape is in a constant state of flux, but more akin to climate than weather. The changes are incremental, following along with the small, subtle changes in our world and society. But in the moment, in the right story, you're staring down a huge storm, watching it rip and tear across the sky before it fades, and it's just a blip in the history books. I mentioned Nazis before. You know the ones. Thought they were king shit in the 1930s up to the mid-40s, did a whole lot of capital A atrocities. Them. Throughout World War II, and in the years after its conclusion, the Third Reich was an easy antagonistic force. They were fresh in the collective memory. They were already culturally associated as the bad guys. 2 dots, easy connection to storytelling. But in time, the pervading source of fear shifted from Nazis to Russians in the Cold War era. Subterfuge, covert ops, and shadowy organizations were the name of the game. Trust and deceit, the weapons of choice. And in time, that too passed, replaced by terrorist cells fought by anti-bureaucratic mavericks in the era of the War on Terror. Now go back and take in some of those stories, those products of their time. Some of the antagonists and conflicts within might feel campy, schlocky, or harmful the further and further removed from their respective eras and conflicts they are. As a direct comparison, we can look back as recently as the stories the War on Terror inspired and find racism and profiling to fit what the American public at that time saw as the bad guy. When we are removed chronologically and culturally from a certain catalyst, it doesn't have the same immediate effect on us. The War on Terror has unraveled, the Cold War went tepid after the Soviet Union's dissolution, and Nazis faded from the public eye after World War II, for a while. Focus down from the general to the specific. Consider Ernst Stavro Blofeld from the 007 films. He evolved from a shadowy third party waiting in the wings of the Cold War to the head of an Illuminati-esque organization in the rebooted series, reintroduced based on society's fears at the time. Or even a character like Bowser in Super Mario. He started as an evil giant spiky-shelled turtle who kidnaps beloved princesses. Now he still does that, but it's been for love all along. When you have pervading, recurring villains, those are the ones that have the greatest chance of changing and evolving as they exist through subsequent eras of creation. But also, it's important to consider that a great many storytelling industries, whether print, film, or game, are just that, industries. It rarely behooves creators to stray too far from the norm, from what will get butts in seats, books in hand, or games downloaded at launch. 007 and Super Mario have been around for decades, as have their antagonistic forces. More recently, you can even look at the Marvel Cinematic Universe. Throughout the first phase, we had to slog through a dozen dark mirrors and somehow more than one giant head that rarely introduced anything new to the formula. But they were safe bets. Risk may be at the forefront of writers' and creatives' endeavors, but it's hard to get producers and financiers on board without some guarantee of success and return. Even independent game developers, less beholden to the big money bags, are still considering the ways to make their games, and by connection, antagonists and conflicts, as palatable as possible to the widest audience possible. But Resident Evil 4 hit a home run in 2004, and in the many, many years following. The success has been established, so the people drip-feeding developers are more likely to give a little more leeway to reinterpret what was into what it needs to be now.
And now she is of our flesh, of our blood.
My faithful disciple will show her the path.
Again, let's lead with Leon to understand Sadler. Leon is a product of circumstances out of his control, forged and refined through past traumas and rigorous training. In light of the dehumanization that conscription to the armed forces calls for, plus the emotional damage he is still grappling with after Raccoon City, we find Leon holding on as tightly as he can to himself, recognizing that his trials and traumas have made him who he is, but also believing in people, the individual. He tries to connect with others, encourages them, genuinely cares, and will fight tooth and nail for people, not an organization, not a mission. Compared to the 2004 Leon, 2023 Leon is far more human. Sadler is introduced after Leon is injected with the Las Plagas parasite, not as an overseer of the village, but as a vision, a harbinger. He is enrobed in darkness, nameless, mysterious, but clearly powerful. And he remains there, in the darkness, out of sight. Sadler only appears in those visions, connecting the entire network of Las Plagas hosts to him. There, he instructs the villagers, deploys his lieutenants, pulls the strings. Here, we recognize Sadler's power, but are more scared of what he represents and what he is capable of. He represents a shadowed force in the deep background of world order, pulling strings and influencing the masses, not for their good, but for his. To meet the Puppet Master is a rarity, but to feel the effects of his influence, the tug from his strings, is absolute and certain. His goal, so far as we can surmise, is to spread the influence of Las Plagas, but not for traditional societal power. Sadler seeks to propagate Las Plagas for control over others. If he can push that much further, control over everyone. And for the whole of the game, he extends that control outward, sending others to attack and stall Leon, or otherwise forcing others to act against their will, as he does with Ashley in order to separate the pair. The prophet need never sully his hands when the flock is so receptive to his call. Players aren't in the same room as Sadler. They never speak face to face with him until some 80% of the way through the campaign. This is the fear that Sadler represents. Not a foreign power, not a traditional attack, but a loss of control, the loss of self. He represents a shadowy, influence-based superpower, pulling every string on the stage and guiding us to where it wants us to go. He represents an encroaching hand of faith that extends its will past places of worship and into the homes and lives of non-believers, whether they agree with it or not. There lies the power in Sadler's new campaign. Its power does not lie in fear of domination, but of assimilation. Sadler does not seek to rule at the head of a table. He seeks to convert everyone to sit when he wills it, to work when he wills it, to worship, always. His end goal is righteous, true, and for the greater good, now and forever. You need only give in to his way, his will. It is so much brighter where he shines his light. Why can't you see that? And that is why Sadler resonates so much in our present day. Because we have reason to be afraid of so much. We are aware of so much. but the loss of our humanity is more than just a moral threshold. Sadler makes it a genuine threat. Under Lord Sadler, there is no self, there is only the network. No goals, no growth, just a shell. There is only the faith, only the vision of the few. To him, to so many in positions of power, we are all just livestock. Ganado. Under Lord Sadler, under Las Plagas, to give unto Sadler is to give everything to him. Your life, your will, your entire self. To die as yourself is to live forever with Lord Sadler. Morir es vivir. His downfall collapses the entire Las Plagas network. The world is safe, none the wiser to everything that it nearly lost. Leon rides off into the sunset, his mission complete, both he and his ward still themselves, albeit changed by what they have been through. The victory is in remaining individuals, defined by what they have been through, both for better and for worse.
It is time to shed the one!
The sign of a good antagonist is not that they endure forever. It is that they burn brightly in the time it matters most for them to do so. We were scared of foreign powers and terrorism in 2004, and so Sadler burned brightly in 2004. The shadows he cast were long that before the brightness died out, he left the way clear for new threats and forces, similar and different, still hiding in the darkness, still waiting for their stories to have the chance to be told. It is rare that an antagonist paves the way for a new iteration of itself, but as long as that new form is a product of its time, not an outdated rehashing, it will always work. Sadler is indicative of how to remake a game's story 20 years later, how to evolve a plot that remains tied to its source material but is given the chance to be its own entity, how to transcend a title and live on, shedding one form in order to give way to a new, terrifying nightmare. May our storytellers always know what makes us tick in the tales they tell, what we need to hear, what we need to fight, and what we're most afraid of in that moment in time. Hello, everyone. Thank you for listening past the conclusion. You're the real ones, and I appreciate it. If you've enjoyed this video or others of mine, please consider joining my Patreon, linked in the description, to support future videos and projects. Now, your homework. What other villains or antagonists can you think of that have had this Sadler treatment, who have had the chance to be reimagined in new retellings of old stories? Let me know. I'd love to hear about them, and I'm always excited for new stories to experience. Be well, and talk to you again soon.